Welcome back to Mental Work. Today, I am sharing the microphone with clinical and forensic psychologist Kirstin Bouse from Perth Psychology Collective. We're going to be talking to you about the needs of early career mental health professionals, mainly from a psychologist perspective, and some of the ways of meeting those needs. Kirstin, nice to see you. Could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. This is a fun topic and an important topic for me to talk about. To introduce myself, I am a clinical and forensic psychologist, and I've been doing this rodeo for about 25 years now, so quite some time. And I'm the director of a group practice called Perth Psychology Collective. We've got around 14, 15, nearly 15, about to bring someone new into the practice, psychologists, and that does include 5 provisionally registered psychologists as well. I've had a group practice for a long time, and I would love to say that I've been extremely strategic and seen all the problems that were about to emerge and been very proactive. But most of the things that I've put into my practice, to be honest, have kind of come from the school of hard knocks. I think there have been some really tough and valuable lessons for me as a practice owner, but they've been really important lessons, some of which are relevant for early career psychs as well.
Well, I'm sorry you had to go through those hard times, but yes, I hope we can benefit from them. Yeah. So as you can see, listener, it sounds like Kirstin has a wealth of experience through her own personal experiences being a practice owner as well as being a psychologist herself. And I'm really grateful that we can have Kirstin on board to take us through these topics. And Kirstin, maybe I'll just start with what we had discussed off air, which was that I think you've done a survey of early career psychologists. Could you just tell us a bit about that and what you found?
Sure, although surveys probably quite complimentary. I put a call out myself because working with and playing, I guess, some kind of developmental role for early career psychs is something that I find extremely exciting and a huge privilege. And I wanted to understand more about the range of where early career psychs are at. So I too put a call out and had some amazing conversations with people who I would say were either kind of, within first 6 months of the provisional registration. So brand spanking new, right through to maybe people who were 5 years, maybe they've been working with clients therapeutically for 5 years, and everything in between. And I guess I came up with this kind of concept, which I think psychologists would definitely understand, and that's Maslow's hierarchy of early career psychologist needs.
I love it.
And the reason I came up with that is because the range of feedback I was getting was really very clear to me around, I guess, how many early career psychs weren't supported in their workplace enough, weren't supported in supervision, or one or the other. So one might have been working well, but the other one wasn't. Right through to people who had wonderful experiences and, they were either right smack bang in those wonderful experiences or retrospectively were saying, yes, it was fantastic. And so that was just really informative for me. And the reason, I put the call out in the first place was because of a program I am developing where I really want to be working with early career psychs. And I really just wanted to kind of get some feedback before I launched into developing that program further.
So, Kirstin, with the survey, it really sounds like support was one of the key needs that arose from, I guess, speaking to early career psychologists. And when they don't have that, it really affects them personally and professionally. Could you tell us more about what they said about that or kind of what you gathered?
For sure. I think the first thing, and they're both really practical kind of sides of things. So there's the workplace and there's the supervision. And the feedback that I received was that there was a real sense from those who would describe the support as very poor. And that was about being really thrown in the deep end without guidance, massive caseloads straight away. And I think a really critical factor also seemed to be whether there was on-site supervision or not. Now, from my perspective, on-site supervision is essential. That doesn't necessarily have to be the APRA primary supervisor, although that's my preference because then as a primary supervisor, I also understand the workplace as well. But nonetheless, a lot of people were saying, we were just kind of thrown to the wolves essentially. And so they're drowning under large clients, they're drowning under presenting issues. There's no one holding them. And, at the beginning of any massive learning curve, you need kind of to be held, you need to be supported, you need a reflective space, you need direct guidance and instruction at times. How do I do X, Y, and Z? And a lot of the people that were quite damaged and feeling really impacted in the long term were describing those kinds of experiences. And what ended up happening is they felt as though they never kind of got clarity around how to work with different people, different presenting issues, different models. It was all just a bit of a chaos in their head. And they were needing, now that ARPRA boxes are ticked and generally registered and all the rest, because that's such a demanding pathway. But once that was done, it freed up time and headspace to then go back and work through the chaos.
Yeah, which is such a shame, because it's like what I'm hearing from you is that they were put in the deep end so much that it kind of ruined their capacity to be able to learn during it. They're just kind of like surviving rather than actually being allowed to learn and grow professionally.
Yeah, and even sadder, not enjoying it.
Yeah, that is really sad.
You put all this effort into studying, like everything's about, I want to be a psychologist, and then to have such a soul-destroying experience. I feel really sad as someone who's been around for a long time. It saddens me that was the factor for some people that either saw them get out, because I did have some people kind of contact me and speak to me who've chosen not to pursue the profession, or that, they were still just feeling really lacking confidence and also doubting the career path. And I think it's one thing to doubt your career path if you've got wonderful support and a great workplace, but for some reason you've just worked it out a bit late that psychology is not for you. It's another if that's come about because you've had a really crappy experience.
I think it's endemic. Like with this podcast, one of the most popular episodes actually is my episode titled Thinking About Quitting. And I had people contact me about that. And myself included, I've experienced those kinds of days where I'm looking up like personal training courses, or maybe I could do massage therapy. And I'm just like, what am I doing here in this profession? And that actually comes from a place of being unsupported during my provisional years and lacking that confidence and having that self-doubt, as you say. So it's really, I guess it's reassuring to hear that other people in the same boat, but it's also shitty that like other people are in the same boat.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I guess I must add that despite being this far into my career and generally having confidence, there are certainly days where I think, I might go back and sell jeans at Just Jeans, which is what I did during my undergrad. And I think that'd be so much nicer. I'll just fold jeans and I'll have inane conversation with people and I'll listen to music. Easy. That's so much easier than sitting in front of clients. And so I think, I think we all have that no matter how far we're into it. But for me, that's more about just a volume of work rather than a lacking of confidence or a messy head. Whereas I think for early career psychs, it's all of those factors that can have them dreaming of quitting and becoming a massage therapist.
Yeah, totally. So Kirstin, with this topic, it's like, so psychologists are saying they're thrown into workplace, they're kind of thrown into the deep end. Like for me as a provisional, it was like sink or swim sort of thing. And why are we being placed in this position? Like assuming that we just don't have evil, like bosses and workplaces out there who deliberately design this to somehow like give us like a treacherous test sort of thing. Like, why are early career psychologists being placed in these positions where they don't have support?
I think, to be honest, and maybe this is a bit of an idealistic perspective. So I'm gonna set aside perhaps what I hope is a really, really, really small portion of people who know they're not doing the right thing but persist. And I think there's practice owners or business owners who they actually just don't know their obligations. And one of the things that I've noticed, and to be honest, having spent so much money, even though I've learned from the School of Hard Knocks, I've still spent so much money getting the right information, legal information, financial information, business consulting generally, business consulting specific to psychology practice. I've spent a shitload of money myself to really try and have an ethical, effective and profitable private practice. And I'll come back to that word profitable in a minute because everyone cringes when I say that. what I find very frustrating, and it happens all the time, is now you can go to your professional group in Facebook and you can say, I'm about to bring on my first prof psych. Can somebody please give me an employee agreement that they've had? It does my head in.
Oh, really?
Oh, absolutely does my head in. And there's many different types of versions of that. And I see my colleagues who I'm very close to who run group practices respond with, we think you should go and seek specific advice from, the right professional and things. I don't tend to jump in to that conversation other than to reiterate what my colleague might say, because sometimes they just go sour. You know what those things can be like.
Absolutely.
What that tells me when that call out is done is that they're actually not taking it seriously, because in some ways you actually have to spend money on getting very specific advice and understanding. There's no point just getting an employee agreement and actually not understanding what you're agreeing to and what you're asking the employee to agree to. So for me, there's a heck of a lot of naivety out there, heck of a lot. And it's the naivety that gets business owners, practice owners, and into strife. And it can be something that leads to that lack of support and exploitation. I think the other side of it is, for a private practice, we typically have no funding other than what the client fees are.
Yes. Yeah.
So, I've got lots of third-party clients in my practice, as well as, fee-paying clients themselves. But that's not a funding stream. That is still a fee for service. It's just Joe Bloggs pays for himself, or a particular organisation pays for Joe Bloggs. And so the realities of running a practice is they are really expensive.
Yes.
We have one of the smallest profit margins as a profession compared to every other profession.
Oh, could you just tell us what roughly that is?
You're probably looking at somewhere between 10 and 15% profit margin.
And what's that compared to other professions?
Oh, we're talking accountants and big accounting firms and finance and things. And I won't go national, because that's, they could actually be publicly listed. So that's a whole other ball game. But you could be looking at 20, 30%, even more. Yes, it's a significant difference. Not a lot of wiggle room. And so then there's these pressures. I'm quite a transparent business owner. I always have been. And the purpose of that is actually not to make people feel bad, but to actually understand where their fees go. And to, really recognise the importance of having, if they want to have really detailed information about that, they probably want to run their own practice. So people don't want the detail, but I think they feel a lot more comfortable in the either subcontracting arrangements or employee arrangements when they do have some idea of where the fees that clients are paying are going. And so I've always been somewhat, relatively transparent without basically handing over my books with my team. And I think that's a really important thing, but because it is just one of the stresses of a business owner. You need to actually run a profitable practice, because profitable means sustainable. Sustainable means I can still open my doors and provide you with a job and income, whether it's employee or subcontractor, in 6 months' time, 12 months' time, 2 years' time. We can weather the storms, blah, blah, blah. If it's not profitable, you'll close the doors. And for me, that would be 20 people, because that's including my admin, 20 people that'll work.
And it's not just affecting 20 people either. It's like their families.
Their families. Exactly.
Yeah, so I've kind of talked about this in previous episodes about how psychologists are just very scared and almost have like an anti-money kind of thing, like you shouldn't be in this role for the money sort of thing. But it's just, you cannot talk about private practice without talking about how you're going to sustain that practice.
Yeah.
One of the things I just wanted to circle back to was that I found it was really interesting how you're talking about the possible naivety of some practice owners. And it really struck me that, say you've got a naive practice owner who's just like doesn't understand their obligation. That meets an early career psychologist who's just trying to like stay afloat and not understanding anything. For me, I'm like, yeah, that's an easy recipe for disaster, right?
Yeah, it's a bit of a no-brainer. Yeah.
So it's like we need both the practice owners to understand their obligations so that they can support the psychs. But then, as you were saying before, it's like it can be helpful if the early career psychs also understand just a little bit about the business as well.
Yeah, and I think, early career psych does obviously include generally registered or registrars. I think when you have employees or subcontractors, so prof regs obviously can't be subcontractors, but registrars can be. They can be either. But I think when you've got people who are going through formal APRA pathways of supervision, then the cost is actually huge to the practice. Absolutely huge. And I think, and people have said to me, people who don't bring people with these kind of qualifications or at this stage of their career, there are group practice owners who just won't do that. And it is because it's not until they've actually finished their pathway and maybe 6 months beyond that they become profitable. And so people will say, well, why would you do it? And for me, it's kind of like, well, why do you become a psych? Because you're not going to make buckets and buckets of money. You do it because you love it, right? Well, hopefully you do it because you love it. You certainly hopefully start out that way. And for me, I'm at a stage of my career. I've loved client work. I've actually only just ceased all my client work.
Oh, wow.
And that is to focus my energies. I feel like I'm actually preempting Erickson's stage of development that I should be happening in my 60s, and I'm only about 48. But
the generativity.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. That stage of development where you kind of want to pass on your wisdom and things. The generation of early career psychs are the psychs that are going to shake up the profession, which I think needs to happen. I really, really, really hope that they are the generation that also heals our profession, because we are so fractured. And they're the ones that, are also then obviously going to work with clients. And, one psych has a significant impact over the course of their career on, I can't even count how many clients, it's massive. And so for me, I'm just at that stage where that is way more exciting to me, to try and have a role in supporting, shaping, developing early career psychs so they can go do these cool things and experience our profession in a really positive way, than for me to be doing client work. And I might not have said that. I wouldn't have said that 5 years ago, but, we all evolve. So
I think it's what's needed, because I feel like the people you were talking to, the early career psychs, I can definitely relate. And my assumption on this podcast is if that I have a feeling about something, somebody else who's listening does, and probably a few people do. So I think it's really what needed. We actually need somebody in our court being like, yeah, we need to support and nurture you, because I think the early years are really, really hard. We are trying to deal with all sorts of presentations, work out our place in this profession, in our career, and as well dealing with this fractured profession, as you say. It's really tough. So I'm glad that there are people like you out there, Kirstin.
Yeah, well, thank you. I just find it super rewarding, and, this is where I want to put my energies, which is why I do what I do and why I take on profs. And I've had students for 10, 12 years coming on to my practice, and that was, I guess, where I learned how to support people at that stage of their career in the first place. It was kind of a safe entry for me to really hone my skills and my understanding in this space. And so for me, that's what I get back out of it, really. That's why I have provisionally registered psychs, even though, some have been at my practice and definitely wouldn't have a full caseload until they've been there at least 6 months. So that's, they're not covering their own costs for 6 months at all.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just to make it explicit to the listener, it's like Kirstin is making a deliberate choice here, because it's like when people are pros, it's like what Kirstin said earlier was like, to be profitable, it's a fee for service thing. And so you need to be bringing in that income to cover the costs of supervision and supporting you, and resources and super and insurance and stuff like that. There is a cost to having a provisional psych on board, but you're choosing to wear that cost, I guess.
Yeah, choosing to wear that cost. And in some ways it's a temporary cost, whereas admin are absolutely critical. They are the cogs and the foundation of a practice. They never generate their own income. But these are all the things that I think people often don't think about, and perhaps including those naive business owners who are taking on their first prov, or just even taking on their first psych in some capacity, and they do a call out for a contract, or they ask a question about GST and stuff in those Facebook groups,
Absolutely. So, Kirstin, I'm going to change the direction a little bit. I kind of have two kind of pointed questions to you. I don't know if one related to the other. So I'll just start with one and see how we go.
Sure. Go for it.
I have one question. So early career psych, sometimes they're really angry at the practice, or they feel like it's really unfair, maybe the split that they're getting if they're a contractor, or if they're an employee, they kind of feel like they're working too hard for not enough support. So like, how do I know if that was me? How do I know if my anger at the practice is justified, or if I'm just kind of being like a soot?
I love it. Just being yourself. It wouldn't be the word I use, but perhaps.
I was trying to think of like a PC word. Yeah.
Yeah, something that's not going to set this on fire. Yeah, I understand. Look, I think a couple of things is, in an ideal world, they're able to sit down with whoever the practice owner is and have a conversation, kind of understand, everything that's being provided. And a great example is that we've had quite significant shifts, for example, in our admin team who've had some really significant events in their own life. So our admin team has been at times next to nothing. And that really demonstrates just how critical they are and what an important expense they are for our practice, and how much they actually take off a clinician's plate. Now, you don't want to have to go through that to prove the worth or anything like that. But I think there are important conversations to be having if you're feeling that way. When I, bring in people into the practice, I don't want to overwhelm them with, okay, so this is your percentage or this is your wage, and here's a kind of pie chart of where it goes. And that's something that definitely happens, but not in the beginning stages, because they're learning about the private, being in that workplace. They're overloaded as it is. But I think asking questions and just saying, look, I'm feeling really frustrated, but I also understand I may not know, I may not have information, the correct information for me to be actually feeling this way. So I'd really like to talk with you and hear where this kind of money, or the difference between what I'm being billed out at and what I'm receiving, whether it be as a subcontractor on a split or whether it be as an employee in wages, I'd really like to understand kind of where that part of the billing that's retained, where does that go? Now, some practice owners won't be open to that conversation. And it is a confronting conversation, because I guess we go straight into, oh God, they're feeling undervalued, but this business costs what it costs. And, so for me, I'd welcome that conversation, but it would be a difficult conversation, because it almost, I guess, starts to feel like you're being challenged as to whether you run a good business, which a lot of us want to think we run it. We try and run a good business. So we feel as though we're being accused of something bad. Yeah. So we get triggered too.
Interesting. I hadn't considered that, because for me, I'm just trying to put myself in my own shoes. So when I was in my first provisional psych role, I was working for a government-based service, and I would do the billing for each client. So I would be earning, I think I was earning about $26 an hour. And then I'd see that we were charging $275 per client session. And so I was like, and I was being overworked. I was seeing 6 clients a day in my first provisional role. And if I was half an hour below my KPI, then the manager would come out to my location and talk to me about my KPI. And I hated that workplace. And I was seeing very complex clients as well from socially disadvantaged areas. I think for me in that role, it would have been I was just curious. I don't think I would have seen it as challenging the practice owner. I was really just curious. I didn't understand, but I can see from what you've just described, how a practice owner could feel as though they are being challenged.
Yeah, because that thing you mentioned before, where money's a dirty word in our profession. Yeah. So it's poking that sore spot. Indirectly, it's, I'm essentially being accused of being greedy, and, come to my house and you'll see I don't live in a mansion. But even if I do live in a mansion, there could be many reasons or ways I got there, and maybe you can live in a mansion too one day. I mean, I do think psychologists undervalue ourselves, across the board, for sure. But no, I would welcome, it'd be a difficult conversation, but I'd welcome that conversation. And I think it's just about, as you said, if you can initiate and ask to have that conversation from a place of curiosity, then I think that is a really good starting place. And I actually think more broadly, referring back to something I said before, I think sadly, even though curiosity is a critical thing in our therapeutic work, we seem to forget it for each other.
Yes, we do. We do, absolutely. One of the things you pointed to earlier as well was, I thought, really important. I think you're pointing to like humility in like the idea that you might not know everything. So, I feel like that goes along with curiosity. And I feel like maybe I'm talking to myself or maybe I'm talking to the listeners, but guys, have some humility. Maybe we don't know what's going on. So just have that conversation.
Oh, I would argue, as transparent as I am, I still am a leader of a practice. And, we've had some rocky times, and it gets to a point where that has to be acknowledged. Otherwise, it's almost like an elephant in the room. My people would absolutely not know the depth of the times that have been really stressful and why, and the gazillion solutions I'm trying to come up with and things. So I think just really trying to understand that as a practice owner, that they're carrying a lot. Like, I've got 4 children, teenagers to young adults. And while none of my staff behave like children, let me be really clear, they don't, they're amazing people, but essentially with 16 staff and 4 kids, I absolutely feel responsible for 20 people in quite a critical way. That probably says a bit about my schemas and stuff, which are all, we all have them. On the flip side, it's about, okay, I'm being asked some questions about this. Where are they coming from? And I think there's that balance that if a prof or an early career psych or any psych feels supported in their workplace, then they're going to be curious, and still have those questions about where's all the money going? Why am I only being paid X? I think then the 2 people are going to be able to have a really good conversation, and it's going to be a nice foundation. It's when there's a sense of, I don't understand where the money goes, and I'm feeling unsupported and undervalued and just kind of dismissed. That's the shitty combination.
Yeah, I agree, because it's like, the money conversation is almost like the surface, and then underneath is those feelings of not feeling valued and unsupported. And that's what actually needs to be addressed.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do have another question related to that then. Like, if we can see the practice owner, like they've got, well, I don't think you're wrong, like schema or not. It's like, it's actually true that you're responsible for a lot of people. And so like, if we can understand where the practice owner is sitting, I wonder if we can just flip it back to the early career psych. And there are stories of like exploitation in our workforce. And so I guess I just want to put it to you as like an experienced psychologist who really is trying to help early career psychs. Like, how do we know if we're actually being exploited?
Well, I mean, it drives me batty when I hear it and see it. And I do hear it and see it, sadly, because then it tarnishes everyone else who's trying to do the right thing. And I know how damaging it is to the early career psych. So I think one of the first things is to educate themselves as much as they can more broadly. So what are the fair work responsibilities that an employer has? What are the ARPRA limitations? Because, I mean, I've heard of profs being contracted. I know that happens, and I've very gently shared that, that's not okay what's happening for them, and helped guide them through, I guess, ways of approaching it and seeing whether there's any kind of remedy to the situation. So I think fair work and ARPRA is, I need to know what I am allowed to do and not allowed to do as a provisionally registered psych, as an example. I also need to know what I am entitled to as an employee. If you're not provisionally registered, then I think you're looking at, okay, what are the reasonable conditions and elements of a subcontract arrangement? People will often say, I get 70% of the split. And to me, that's irrelevant compared to someone who might charge 50% if the fee for the 70% is a bulk bill rate versus, what might be a reasonable rate. So I think, there's a lot of just flippant conversation around, this is my split, that's my split. And there's actually no digging around, well, what are the bill out fees? What are the range of bill out fees? How can you progress does your split progress? Because that can be really difficult as a practice owner to progress splits. people's increase in income often comes from client increase in fees, more so than a chain split. How would it be different if I was a registrar? And once I finish my registrar as a subbie, what happens then? Flexibility, diary management, niching, client type, support, what kind of support? That's a big word. Like, it covers so many things as well. So it's worth having conversations with a range of people. But if you're talking to your peers, understand that they're not also necessarily the authority. So Fair Work is an authority, AHPRA is an authority, the ATO is an authority. If you're going to be a subcontractor, actually spend the money and go and talk to an accountant about what your obligations are, because you're running a small business.
That makes a lot of sense. So like, in answer to the question, like, am I being exploited? I wish there was a simple answer, but it sounds very nuanced and complex depending on your circumstance.
Yeah, definitely. And while, as I said, go to the authorities, the bodies that kind of dictate what we have to do, what the practice owner has to do. And then, yes, also ask peers, but try and ask a range of peers in a range of settings. I've been a solo practitioner, I've been a subcontractor in a group practice, and I've run a group practice, and I've been a government employee, and I've been a university employee. So I've kind of ticked a lot of boxes. And, I think if you can get information from people who've been in all of those different domains, then you're also getting a good picture of what's available and appropriate.
I agree. Yeah. Because sometimes when you get info from your peers, it's like sometimes it can be a bit of an echo chamber, or like simply you guys just don't know. And sometimes it's really good to get like multiple pieces of information to put together that bigger picture. So I feel like that's really important. And I will chuck the links to Fair Work. I've put them in the show notes before, but it just keeps on coming up and up. And it's like, know your rights, know the employer's obligations. It's really important. And so like, if you feel like you're being exploited, it's worth educating yourself, but also having those diverse conversations.
Definitely. And I think, if you're being exploited, you can actually ring Fair Work and they'll have a conversation with you around that for sure. You can ring AHPRA, you can ring the APS or the AAPI if you're members of those, and get some information and some guidance there too. And, you can also reach out, I guess, to whether they're a formal supervisor or just a mentor who's been around the block a bit, or their avenues as well. It's one thing that I do really like to see in the Facebook professional groups is the ability to reach out and get some guidance on all sorts of issues, not just these issues. That's when we do it well as a profession in terms of supporting one another. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. And then I've got a complete 360 with kind of the next thing. But like one thing that you mentioned to me off air that you're kind of passionate about was this idea of personal development for psychologists. And I really just wanted to touch on that because I do feel like if I reflect on my own personal experience with training, it was really that we had so much to learn. And I literally remember the coordinator for my course being like, and here's the like self-work, like mindfulness book, or we're going to have like a mindfulness session every week. And I was like, oh my God, bloody hell, I cannot fit that in. Like, I just ain't got time. But it actually has had consequences in that, like, one of the things that I didn't learn about throughout my training was how to manage slight transference and countertransference and how to take care of myself as a professional. And so I'm really interested to hear, like, what you think about personal development for psychs.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of it. And I don't mean to laugh, but I'm like, we are the worst profession. We are the worst profession for teaching, let alone practicing.
I hear that.
How to look after ourselves. And I think the interesting thing, I don't mean to be controversial, but I think there's a line and there's a slight difference between looking after yourself and actually indulging yourself.
Okay.
And I'm so nervous about, I guess, saying this in a public forum. And I'll be really upfront, this is not something I've actually seen in my own practice at all. If anything, my own practice, I really do need to encourage my team to look after themselves. And that's not good. That's not like a badge of honour that we wear, although we like to think of it that way. But I certainly know enough very real life stories where I guess putting boundaries in place does, and looking after oneself can move into an indulgence, and meaning that person just consistently doesn't meet their professional obligations.
Interesting.
And that's a really, really tricky line. And when I think about that, it actually leads me back to what it's not the origin of why I feel so strongly about personal development, but for me, it's like, okay, maybe this would be a bit of a remedy, a bit of, something that would help people find where the line moves from self-care to indulgence. For me, personal development, I actually did my Gestalt psychotherapy training after my master's, and it's a 4-year, very intensive.
Wow, 4 years.
Yeah. Yes. And it's all your own shit. Which just seems to keep coming, But, I loved it at the time, valued it at the time. And the further along in my career, the more I realized it actually helped me really develop a strong sense of who I was and, for want of a better word, develop some internal resilience, that self-awareness. It certainly sparked that interest and curiosity and that desire to continue to work on myself and understand myself, try new things, and recognize that just when I've got something sorted, I probably haven't, and I might still be tested. And, so all of that has just spilled into my life as a whole, not just my working life, but for me, I guess one of the consistent things I've had over the course of my career from clients, and I've worked in such a vast range of settings, is an ease, I think, that I have with myself in a therapeutic space. And my clients would say they meet a person before they meet a psychologist, they meet a human before they meet a psychologist. And some of those who are far more articulate would say that was the critical factor in their healing. And we know this. We know that the therapeutic relationship is you can have all the bells and whistles, you can learn a gazillion magical tricks,
yes,
and things. But if you actually can't be present, attuned and responsive to your clients, then those things will not be anywhere near as effective. And for me, when I talk about personal development for early career psychs, it comes from a place of seeing how anxiety-provoking it is for early career psychs to be sitting in front of clients generally, or sitting in front of particular clients, their reluctance, to the lack of safety they feel and acknowledge what's being triggered for them from clients. As you said, transference and countertransference.
Yeah.
Gestalt terms of projection, similar kind of concept. And I think, our profession can sometimes be accused of just being a bit like a textbook.
Yes.
And I think that's that two-dimensional. It's when somebody doesn't feel comfortable or even know how to bring themselves into that therapeutic relationship. That's when a client will experience that person, that therapist, as a two-dimensional textbook kind of person.
Yes.
And that doesn't mean you disclose lots about your life. That you don't, to be three-dimensional and to be a person first and psych second does not mean you have to tell people lots of stuff about yourself, or tell clients lots of things about yourself. It's about, ideally, clients have a sense of who you are underneath all the qualifications and all the rest. And they're just, get a really, really genuine sense of who you are. And I've found that just has such a profound impact on clients. And it actually lays a foundation for clients to then be able to be fully themselves in session 2 and in that journey, which of course we know is critical. But how can we help clients achieve that and be that when we struggle to do that ourselves? So for me, the personal development element is how do I truly learn presence? How do I learn attunement? And how do I be responsive? Well, all of that actually starts with knowing oneself and knowing how to be present with yourself, knowing how to be attuned, responsive, understanding where you and I begin and end, and the relationship and what goes on between us. There's this in-between stuff process. So for me, that's the really juicy stuff. Like that's the stuff I love when I work with early career psych.
Well, it's really clear. Like, you sound very passionate about it. And I felt like it was very powerful what you just said with us. And it also feels very reassuring. So I'm actually starting out with my schema therapy accreditation, and part of a big part of that is self-examination. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And if it reassures me, I'm like, maybe it'll reassure the listeners. So it makes me feel like I'm on the right path. For me, I've got a very high unrelenting standard schema. So to me, it feels like indulgence to even think about myself and do a little bit. So it's really reassuring. And it also highlights to me, instances where it has been very powerful, and maybe like I can encourage the listener to think about like times when them being present has had a really profound effect on clients. I know I've had at least a few situations where it has, and that hasn't been from like massive self-disclosures or anything. It's from being, like you say, attuned, responsive, and actually like connecting with them as a person first within, I guess, the boundaries of like that professional relationship.
Yeah. But that's also exhausting, isn't it?
It is. It's totally exhausting.
You know, to have that level of presence session after session after session is exhausting. And so at the same time, that's when, I guess, when we can be present with ourselves and all those other things I've mentioned, we actually then have a much better way of gauging how we're also traveling in this gig. And I feel as though I've come out of a period of burnout a bit, you know, later in my career, but I'm sadly convinced that early career psychs will experience that much earlier in their career.
Oh, yeah, hands up. Yeah, already.
If they don't, you know, understand and have that real kind of internal awareness. And that's because the world moves faster. Like there's just so many differences between when I started and, you know, early career psychs now. And so for me, I feel quite protective. It's like, how can I help this population of new professionals last the distance? You know, how can I help them remain passionate and interested in their profession, but not at the expense of themselves? And so that's why I say self-care is super important. And I'm mindful of that self-indulgence because we have professional responsibilities to our clients.
Yeah, it's so funny you mentioning that, because it's like for me, like with my unrelenting standards, I'm like, what? People don't do their notes and they don't meet their requirements, and I'm like, oh my God, who are these people? So it's just bizarre to me.
Yeah,
it's really interesting, and I'm so glad that you brought it to like my awareness and the awareness of listeners. And like I feel like we have a shared goal. Part of the reason why I'm doing this podcast is because I think psychology is an amazing profession, and I am seeing my colleagues like burn out and leave the profession, and I want us to keep going in it, but doing so in a way that like doesn't tear us apart pretty much.
Absolutely. I mean, you've just said everything that I feel. I have done a lot of media work in the past, and again, people would say, why would I do it? And it's like, I just love psychology. We have so much to offer and so broadly. And, you know, I just want to see our profession and every individual in it be able to be, you know, really, I guess, wholehearted in this experience and enjoy it and be able to do it for as long as it genuinely floats their boat.
Absolutely. Well, Kirstin, I think that might be a good place to start wrapping up. And I just want to say I'm so grateful for the learnings and experiences you've shared with us. So I'm very grateful. And please feel free to share with the listeners how they can find out more about your early career kind of thingy that you're starting.
That's probably a really good way to put it.
Okay.
because I've got I know exactly how it's going to look, but I've really just got to work on some of the minutiae now. But essentially, they can find me first and foremost at Perth Psychology Collective. They can definitely contact me through that. My goal with the human scientist practitioner is actually to be running retreats for early career psychs where they do a lot of self-work, which also has the added bonus of being able to be done with clients. So there'll be PD points that they can get, but it's just an immersive experience, which for me, having run retreats before, is really transformational. And that's just kind of the beginning of what I want to develop. So if people are keen to kind of stay connected, the best way is just Instagram, Kirstin Bouse Psych, and also Perth Psychology Collective. And eventually, when I get my shit together, so to speak, and get the minutiae going rather than the big vision stuff that I have, then human scientist practitioner will be the avenue people can find me at.
Great. Thank you so much, Kirstin. I'll put the links to those things in the show notes and really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
No worries.
It's been fun. It's been really fun. Thank you.
Good. Yeah. And listeners, if you'd like to give me any feedback or if you have any ideas for any future episodes, please feel free to send me an email at mentalworkpodcast@gmail.com. Feel free to tell your colleagues and share this episode with anybody who you think might be interested. That means psychologists, other early career mental health professionals, anybody who could benefit from this. Really keen for you to share it, set them up with the Spotify, or get them to get it up on their phone themselves and put it in their podcast listening app. Thanks so much, Kirstin, and see you guys later. Bye.